mechanisms across the biomembrane. I'm sure that you all must have read this this before also in your +2. So you will be knowing a lot of things. You'll be making additions to what you already know. What is a biomembrane? A biomembrane is a selectively permeable membrane that separates cell from the external environment or creates intercellular compartments. So, a biological membrane is selectively permeable. This is important because selectively permeable is different from semi-permeable. What is the difference? Semi-permeable membranes, they are allowing some molecules to pass and they don't allow some molecules to pass. But this is dependent only on the size of the molecule. So a semi-permeable membrane will probably allow all small molecules to pass and will prevent the movement of large molecules. However, selectively permeable is not same as semi-permeable. Selectively permeable means that the membrane has the option to choose which molecules it will allow to pass and which molecules it will not allow to pass. So it might be allowing some large molecules to pass and it might not be allowing some small molecules to pass as well. So the important point is that selective permeability is different from semi-permeability. Okay. So biological membranes, they are usually made up of two layers of amphipathic lipids. And in this bilayer, we have many proteins that are embedded. So in the coming slides, we'll be seeing the different types of lipids that are present in the plasma membranes and the different types of proteins that are present, their functions, and what are the various transport mechanisms. First slide. First, we'll talk about the membrane lipids. So the plasma membrane usually have three major kinds of lipids. These are phospholipids, glycolipids, and cholesterol. All these three are amphipathic lipids. Amphipathic, do you know what amphipathic means? Amphipathic means that it will have a hydrophobic or water hating region and hydrophilic, that is water loving region. So you can see the structures of phospholipids, glycolipids, and cholesterol in this diagram. And you can see that all three of them have a hydrophobic region and a hydrophilic region. In case of a phospholipid, there are two fatty acid chains that are hydrophobic, and the rest of the molecule, which is made up of glycerol, phosphate, and choline, in this example, is hydrophilic. Similarly, in the case of glycolipids, there are two fatty acid chains that are hydrophobic, and the sugar and glycerol part are hydrophilic. In cholesterol, the sterol ring part is hydrophobic, and a hydroxyl group, which is attached to the cholesterol molecule, forms the hydrophilic head. So you need to remember that the membranes, biological membranes, are usually made up of three types of lipids, which are phospholipids, glycolipids, and cholesterol. Now we will look into the details of each of these kinds of lipids. First, we'll discuss phospholipids. A phospholipid molecule is made up of four components. This diagram out here shows the basic structure of a phospholipid molecule. It consists of fatty acids which are attached to a platform. This platform may be glycerol or it can be sphingosine. This in turn is attached to a phosphate group, which in turn is attached to an alcohol. So this is the basic structure of a phospholipid. Now, if the platform that I've mentioned here, this platform, if it is glycerol, then the lipid is called a phosphoglyceride. So this is the basic structure of a phosphoglyceride. You have glycerol, you have fatty acid attached to the glycerol, you have phosphate and alcohol. If you remove this alcohol part, then what is left is called phosphatidate. Why is this important? Because the naming of various phosphoglycerolipids can be derived from phosphatidate. Like phosphatidate, this structure, phosphate, glycerol, and fatty acid, this is phosphatidate. And this head group, if you keep changing this head group, then you obtain the different phosphoglycerolipids. Like when the head group is water, then it is called phosphatidic acid. When it is choline, it is called phosphatidylcholine or lecithin. When it is serine, it is called phosphatidylserine. If it is ethanolamine, it is called phosphatidylethanolamine. And when it is inositol, it is called phosphatidylinositol. These are the various phospholipids that you will be encountering in biological membranes. This slide shows the structure of different phospholipids. You don't need to remember the structure. It's just for your knowledge, as in just so that you can have an idea of what a phosphatidylcholine molecule will look like. This again shows how a phospholipid molecule has amphipathic structure. This part is the hydrophilic head. This part is the hydrophilic tail. The hydrophilic tail, because it is water repellent, it orients itself in such a way that it is not exposed to water. So these head groups, these are the polar heads. They face the extracellular surface and the cytoplasmic surface, the aqueous environments. Whereas the hydrophobic tails, they are buried towards inside so that they do not interact with the aqueous environment. Next, we come to glycolipids. Glycolipids usually are sugar derivatives of sphingolipids. Sphingolipids are derived from sphingosine. You remember that I said that we have different types of alcohols. So sphingosine is also a type of alcohol. And sphingosine, when it is attached to a long chain fatty acid along with a carbohydrate residue, it forms a cerebroside, which is an example of a glycolipid. You will be reading about all these structures in much detail in your chapters on chemistry of lipids. Here, I'm just giving you an overview of what a cerebroside or a glycolipid will look like. Cholesterol molecule, this is the structure of a cholesterol molecule. All the things that are shaded in green, that form the hydrophobic part. And the pink structure and the pink hydroxyl group represents the hydrophilic part. So by showing these structures, I just wanted you all to know that all the membrane lipids are amphipathic and they have a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic region. Okay, the amphipathic lipids, if they are dissolved in water, then they can adopt three different types of structures. These are micelles, or it can form a bilayer sheet, or liposomes. What are micelles? Micelles, they consist of a single layer of phospholipids, of single layer of lipids, amphipathic lipids. And the core is it's made up of the hydrophobic side fatty acid chains, and there is no water in the hydrophobic interior. Micelle is made up of a single layer of amphipathic lipids. The second structure which the amphipathic lipid can adopt when it is dissolved in water is a bilayer sheet. This is the structure that we get to see in biological membranes. And the third structure that can be adopted is a liposome. Liposome consists of two layers of amphipathic lipids which fold on themselves to form a closed bilayer. And it is a hollow vesicle. There is a aqueous cavity enclosed within the liposome. Why is the structure of liposome so important? It is important because these days liposomes are being synthesized in vitro, and they are being used as drug delivery vehicle for administration of nutrients and pharmaceutical drugs. These liposomes, they are packed with the drugs, and then they go and fuse with the cell membrane, and the drug that is packed within the liposome is delivered into the cell. That is why liposomes are being researched these days, because they're acting as drug delivery vehicles. Then the fluid mosaic model. You already have read this in your 12th standard. Fluid mosaic model is used to describe the structure of biological membranes. And the cell membrane, it is made up of two layers of amphipathic lipids, usually phospholipids. And within the bilayer, you have different types of proteins that are embedded. So it seems like the proteins are floating in a sea of lipids. So because there are two layers, there are two planes also, two planes of membrane. The lipids are free to move laterally within the plane of the membrane. So there is considerable lateral movement of lipids as well as proteins if the protein is not anchored. Unless the protein is not anchored, the proteins and the lipids, they are free to diffuse sideways within the plane of the membrane. However, the transverse movement, as in across the two layers, that is hindered. That is not happening at the same extent as the lateral movement. Now, what is the thickness of this membrane? If you consider the thickness only of the bilayer, it includes the two layers of the membrane, then it is approximately 3 nanometer. But if you include the thickness of the proteins that are protruding from the surface of the membranes, then the thickness is approximately 6 to 10 nanometers. The lipid bilayer gives fluidity and elasticity to the membrane, and the membranes are non-covalent assemblies. What it means is that these lipid molecules, they are not covalently bound to each other. They are bound by non-covalent interactions. Therefore, they are free to move within the plane. Lipid molecules diffuse rapidly in the plane of the membrane, as do proteins, unless they are anchored by specific interactions. In contrast, lipid molecules and proteins do not readily rotate across the membrane. Small amounts of carbohydrates are also present in the cell membrane. So you see these glycoproteins and glycolipids. So these are carbohydrate residues. These are usually seen in the outer leaflet. Glycolipids and glycoproteins, you usually get to see them in the outer leaflet of the cell membranes. Then this point is very important. Plasma membrane lipid are asymmetrically distributed between the two bilayers. This means that the lipid composition of these two layers is not the same. The lipids that are present in the outer leaflet are different from the lipids that are present in the inner leaflet. So you see that these are the two bilayers. In the outer leaflet, you get to see more of glycosphingolipids, sphingomyelin, and phosphatidylcholine. Whereas in the inner leaflet, you get to see phosphatidylinositol, phosphatidylethanolamine, and phosphatidylserine. And this is very important. Why? Because it has been seen that if phosphatidylserine is present in the outer leaflet, then it acts as a marker for programmed cell death. Okay, so phosphatidylserine is usually present in the inner leaflet. Phosphatidylcholine and choline containing phospholipids, they are usually present in the outer leaflet. And if phosphatidylserine is present in the outer leaflet, then it can cause apoptosis or programmed cell death. So how is it that these lipids, they are we have different composition? How is this asymmetry maintained for the phospholipids, that phosphatidylcholine is present in the outer leaflet only and phosphatidylserine is present in the inner leaflet only usually? How is this asymmetry maintained? For this, we have different types of transporter proteins: propases, lipases, and scramblases. Propases, what do propases do? Propases, they transport phosphatidylcholine from the inner leaflet to the outer leaflet. This is the cytosol. This is the extracellular space, and you can see that this is the inner leaflet. This is the outer leaflet, and propases, they make sure that whatever phosphatidylcholine or sphingomyelin is present in the inner leaflet, it is transported to the outer leaflet. And this is an energy consuming process. ATP is needed for this. Lipases, do the opposite. As in, they transport lipids from the outer leaflet to the inner leaflet. So flipases make sure that phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylethanolamine that are present in the outer leaflet somehow are transported to the inner leaflet. And this is also an energy consuming process. ATP is used. And scramblases, what do they do? Scramblases do not use energy and they allow free diffusion, as in they allow lipids from the outer leaflet to move to the inner leaflet and from the inner leaflet to move to the outer leaflet. That is why energy is not needed for this process. Okay. Next, we come to the type of membrane proteins. So there are two types of proteins that are present: integral proteins and peripheral proteins. Integral membrane proteins are very firmly associated with the lipid bilayer and are removable only by agents that interfere with hydrophobic interactions. Peripheral proteins associate with the membrane through electrostatic interactions and hydrogen bonding with the hydrophilic domains of integral proteins. They can be released by relatively mild treatments that interfere with the electrostatic interactions, like changing the pH. So what it means? Basically, it means that integral proteins, they form an integral part of the membrane, and it is very difficult to dissociate them from the membrane. On the other hand, peripheral proteins, they are attached to the membrane through electrostatic interactions, and the electrostatic interactions depend on the charge of the protein. The charge on the protein can vary with the pH. You will be reading about this, or maybe you have already been taught that as the pH is changed, the charge on the proteins and can also change. So peripheral proteins can be removed easily by a mild treatment with detergents or by changing the pH. This slide shows that integral proteins can have an alpha helical structure, or there can be a helical bundle in which there is a single peptide which has multiple alpha helical domains. Or they can, or if the integral protein is having a beta pleated sheet, then many beta pleated sheets come together to form a beta barrel. I'm sure that you must have read about alpha helix and beta pleated structure, secondary structure of proteins previously, and you will be reading about these in protein chemistry again. So you can come back then and understand. You'll be able to understand it better later on. That integral proteins, they usually are alpha helical in nature. If they're not alpha helical, if beta pleated sheet is present, then it cannot be a single beta pleated sheet. It will always be in the form of a beta barrel. This classification again shows that membrane proteins are of two types, integral and peripheral. Integral can be of two types again: transmembrane, which we have already seen, or anchored membrane protein. Anchored, you understand what anchor means? Anchor means there's something holding you down, holding the protein down. So the protein can be anchored with the help of a lipid chain. So lipid chain anchored membrane protein, or it can be a GPI anchor. GPI anchor is glycosyl phosphatidyl inositol anchored membrane protein. Transmembrane proteins can be single pass or they can be multiple pass. This is just a very basic picture to show what different types of protein look like. This is an integral protein. These two proteins, you can see that they're anchored proteins. You see these small tails. These are hydrophobic in nature, and they go and insert themselves within the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, and that is how they get anchored to the cell membrane. And this is a peripheral protein. You can see that it is not having any anchor. It is not transmembrane, and it can be dissociated easily. This again shows the different types of integral proteins. There can be single type 1 is a single transmembrane. It has a single transmembrane helix with amino terminal towards the outside and carboxyl terminal towards the inside. If this is reversed, it forms type 2 integral proteins. Type 3 integral proteins, though it is a single polypeptide, but it has many alpha helical regions which span the domain multiple times. Type 4 In this, you have different polypeptides which come together. All of them have alpha helical segments and they span the membrane multiple times. But here it was a single polypeptide, and here there are different polypeptides which have come together. Type 5 are lipid linked proteins. You can see this is an anchor. And type 6, they have anchors as well as a transmembrane domain. Next, we come to another very important topic, that is factors affecting fluidity of membrane. The cell membrane is fluid. So, how is the fluidity of the membrane? What are the factors that influence the fluidity of the membrane? There are mainly two factors: temperature and composition. So, below normal physiological temperatures, lipids in the bilayer form a semi-solid liquid ordered state, in which all types of motion of individual lipid molecules is constrained. This is general knowledge. This is common knowledge that as the temperature decreases, the motion of the molecules decreases. So, in liquid ordered state, the lipids in the bilayer uh, they are in a they are in a constrained arrangement. Okay. Above physiological temperatures, the fatty acid chains are in constant motion produced by rotation around the CC bond and by lateral diffusion. You already know that the lipids are free to diffuse laterally within the plane of the membrane. So when the temperatures are raised, all types of motion they increase. Rotation around the CC bond or the lateral diffusion of lipids, everything increases. And this type of arrangement is called liquid disordered state. So you can see that in this, you see that all the molecules are arranged in a compact fashion, in a constrained fashion, and this is the liquid order state. As the temperatures increase, the liquid disordered state is achieved. And what is Tm? Tm is the point at which half of the molecules are in the ordered state and half of them are in the disordered state. Okay, so you know that there are two types of fatty acids, saturated and unsaturated. Long chain saturated fatty acids, they tend to pack in liquid ordered state, whereas long chain unsaturated fatty acids, they have kinks in the chain and they prefer the liquid disordered state. This will become more clear in this diagram. You can see that these are fatty acids. This is saturated fatty acid, and they are arranged in a compact fashion. This is the liquid ordered state. But when the unsaturated fatty acid is present, then it leads to there's a kink in the fatty acid chain, and these kinks they prevent tight compaction or tight stacking of lipids together, and therefore the liquid disordered state is favored. That is why we say that unsaturated fatty acids, they we should have more of them because they prevent tight compaction of the membrane and they prevent the membrane from becoming too rigid. The next important component is sterols, like cholesterol. And sterols, they have a very interesting effect on the lipid bilayer fluidity. They have a paradoxical effect. By paradoxical effect, I mean that they interact with phospholipids. Sterols, when they interact with phospholipids, which have unsaturated fatty acid chains, they cause compaction and constrain their motion in the bilayers. On the other hand, when sterols they associate with sphingolipids and phospholipids which have long saturated fatty acids, then they tend to fluidize the bilayer. So when a sterol is interacting with a phospholipid which has unsaturated fatty acid, it causes compaction. Whereas when a sterol is associating with phospholipids or sphingolipids with saturated fatty acid, it leads to increased fluidity of the bilayer. So In this figure, you can see that this region has phospholipids and this region has sphingolipids. The purple circles that you see, they represent the sphingolipids, and the blue structures are phospholipids. Phospholipids are having one unsaturated fatty acid chain, and when cholesterol associates with these with this unsaturated fatty acid, it leads to decreased compaction, or it leads to increased fluidity of the membrane. However, in regions where sphingolipids are present and you have saturated fatty acid chains, then the cholesterol molecule associates with the saturated fatty acid present in the sphingolipid and it leads to compaction. So you can see that this area, wherever you are seeing these purple circles, this seems to be more compact than the rest of the membrane. Also, cholesterol is a fluidity buffer. That is, when the temperature is below Tm, then cholesterol disrupts the close packing of acyl chains, causing increased fluidity. And when the temperatures are above Tm, cholesterol constrains motion of acyl chains, leading to decreased fluidity. Otherwise, what will happen? That when the temperatures are too low, then the membrane will become very rigid and very brittle. Cholesterol prevents this. Cholesterol prevents the close packing of acyl chains. Therefore, it does not it does not allow the membrane to become too rigid when the temperature is low. On the other hand, when the temperatures are high, cholesterol prevents the motion of acyl chains, preventing the membrane to become too fluid. Okay, so cholesterol is preventing the membrane to become too brittle or to become too fluid, and therefore cholesterol is called a fluidity buffer. This slide again is telling the same thing. Next, we come to what are membrane microdomains or rafts or lipid rafts. These are stable associations of sphingolipids and cholesterol in the outer leaflet. And these microdomains are slightly thicker than the other membrane regions. You have seen this. In this diagram, this region is a lipid raft or a microdomain, membrane microdomain. So these regions are stable association of sphingolipids with cholesterol. They are present in the outer leaflet, and these regions are slightly thicker than the other membrane regions. And these are enriched with specific types of membrane proteins, like GPI anchor proteins. This again shows a region a region showing a lipid raft domain, where you have more of sphingolipids and you have more of cholesterol, and which is causing compaction. Next, what are caveolae? Caveolae are these microdomains only, but when these lipid rafts, they associate with a protein called caveolin, it leads to inward curvature or inward vagination of the membrane, and they form structures called caveolae. Okay. So with this, we have finished discussing the biomembranes and their structure. Now we'll come to the transport mechanisms across cell membrane. So we all know that there are two types of transport. You already know this: passive transport and active transport. Passive transport needs no energy, and it is of three types: diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. Osmosis you have already read in your previous lecture, I think. So we will not be talking about osmosis, but we will be talking about diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Diffusion is a substance tends to move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And this rate of diffusion depends on concentration gradient, size and mass of the molecule, temperature, solvent density, surface area of the membrane. An example of diffusion is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide diffuses through the membranes. So because our cell membrane has a hydrophobic core, therefore, usually only lipid-soluble molecules are able to diffuse through the membrane. Next, we come to facilitated diffusion. As I mentioned that the membrane has a hydrophobic core and therefore usually lipid soluble molecules are able to diffuse. But what about the molecules that are not lipid soluble? If they are also present in unequal concentrations across a membrane and if they have to diffuse, then you need a protein which will allow the diffusion, and then it is called facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion is that there is no protein needed, the molecule is simply crossing across the membrane. But in facilitated diffusion, you need the help of some protein or some channel, some transporter, which will allow diffusion. But the important point to note is that this transporter is not going to make use of any energy because the movement is occurring from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. It's going to be a spontaneous movement. It is only facilitating the movement. So no energy is needed. And facilitated diffusion, it can occur with the help of two types of proteins, channels or carrier proteins. Now, what is the difference between channels and proteins? Channel proteins transport ions, and carrier proteins they transport molecules. The position of channel protein is fixed. It is not going to change its conformation. On the other hand, carrier proteins they usually occur in two conformations. One conformation will be facing the intercellular side, and the other conformation will be facing the extracellular side. Channels they usually form pores through which the molecules will pass. And in carrier proteins, the solute molecules they first bind to one side of the carrier protein and then they're released to the other side. And the thing is repeated. Because channels they're forming a pore, and through this pore, the transport rate is very high. On the other hand, the carrier proteins they have lower transport rates. Channels they are not going to bind to any solute. It is just forming a pore, and the solute molecules will pass through the pore. On the other hand, carrier proteins they first bind to the solute molecule, then they change their conformation, then they release it. Then they again bind to the molecule, change the conformation, release it. So these are the main differences between channels and carrier proteins. If you have to give an example of a carrier protein, which is facilitating diffusion, then the example is transport of glucose across cell membrane by GLUT transporters. GLUT transporters stand for glucose transporters, and you will be reading about these in chemistry of carbohydrates. There are different types of GLUT transporters: GLUT 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and depending on their different locations and different KMs. So you'll be reading about this, but for now, you can remember that example of facilitated diffusion is transport of glucose across cell membrane by GLUT transporters. Channels, so you already know that there are many types of channels like sodium channels, potassium channels, calcium channels. All of them are present in the cell membrane and they allow, and the channels are usually involved in transport of ions. This image is just showing, recapitulating the different types of passive transport. There can be simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion through a channel, or facilitated diffusion through a transporter protein or carrier protein, and osmosis. I should mention something. There's something called aquaporins. Aquaporins, these are also channels, but they allow movement. They are specifically for movement of water. Okay. Next, we come to active transport. Active transport needs energy, and active transport can be of two types. It can be primary active transport or it can be secondary active transport. Primary active transport directly uses ATP, and examples are sodium potassium ATPase, calcium pump, and proton pump. Secondary active transport does not make use of ATP directly, but it makes use of electrochemical gradients which have already been established by the help of primary active transport of ions. So I hope you all know what is an electrochemical gradient. I'll just briefly explain what it means. So you can see that you have Suppose this is a sodium potassium ATPase, and it is transporting sodium from inside outside, and it is transporting potassium from outside to inside. So you have more of sodium out here, less of sodium out here. This is forming a chemical gradient, but there is a gradient of charges also. You have more of sodium here, you have more of potassium here, but 3 sodium ions are being transported and only 2 potassium ions are being transported inside. So a charge gradient, voltage difference is also being generated, and therefore it is called electrochemical gradient. A sodium potassium pump, which is a primary active transport, will establish an electrochemical gradient. It will pump all the sodium ions and outside, and it will take all the potassium ions inside. Now, the sodium ions that are outside, they will have a natural tendency to move inside, but they cannot move inside because there is no, they cannot cross the hydrophobic membrane, hydrophobic core of the membrane. So, what happens in secondary active transport? That these sodium ions, which have a tendency to move inward spontaneously, they will move, and along with it, something else will also move, either in the same direction or in the opposite direction. This is what is meant by secondary active transport. That it is making use of energy which is stored in the form of electrochemical gradients. And a secondary active transport can either be a symporter or antiporter. What is a symporter and what is an antiporter? This is a symporter in which both the molecules are being transported in the same direction, and antiporter is when both the molecules are transported in opposite directions. Now and the example of secondary active transport is sodium glucose co-transporter. We will be discussing in detail about. Can you? Okay, so I think the time is over. So we will be continuing with the lecture. Some part is left. We will take this in the next lecture on Monday. Thank you so much.